Pop quiz, Darlene.
Okay.
What's the number one gripe that I've made on the pod?
I don't know. Something gardening related?
No, it's this. Paying people for the stuff you want should not be hard.
Right. Yes. You've mentioned.
Lawyers deal with complex issues every day. Accepting payments from clients should not be one of them.
True. And that's why we use Helsum. They are a Canadian payment processing company with a great reputation for service and transparency. And with Helsum, accepting all kinds of credit and debit card payments is easier, faster, and more affordable.
Yeah, Helsum was designed for business owners. Through their cloud-based platform, they equip folks with tools like online invoicing, email and text message payment requests, and virtual terminal.
And they do it with an interchange plus pricing model.
So we here at the Lawyer Life Podcast are really impressed with Helsum, and we recommend that you give them a look if you want to make payments easy for your clients. Just visit helsum.com/lawyerlife to get your first $6,000 worth of processing free. That's HELCIM.com/lawyerlife to get started with better payments today. Welcome to the Lawyer Life Podcast, where we seek to navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. In this short season 5, we focus on entrepreneurship and innovation. On today's episode, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We've asked legal innovators to provide the best piece of advice they've ever received. And boy, did they deliver. I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hello, Darlene.
Hello.
What's going on?
Well, you know that I'm having an exciting day.
Tell me about that.
I have a new mic. Not a new Mike Anderson, a new mic. And it's making all the difference.
Yeah.
Doesn't it sound great?
Yeah, I mean, we are people with modest needs. You know, when we get something new in our life, like a new microphone, that can really float us for, I feel like, weeks.
Well, I think even in the before times, it would have floated me for a bit. But, you know, fun is just in short supply. So when I got this mic, it really made my day.
Oh, goodness. Well, here we are. So we are in the final episode of our short season 5, where we're focusing on going out on your own, starting something new, being a lawyer that, wants to, so to speak, break the mold and create a thing of their own. And on that note, I mean, we both have been creating something new as we've been working on this season, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you want to hint anything about what you've been working on, or will it be a complete surprise to the listener when you launch it?
Well, the danger of hints is that then you are completely accountable. So, yeah, I mean, I hinted on the gold episode, but I'm working on a new music-related project and very excited about it. I'm tapping into the music-loving person that I was before going to law school. And anyway, started doing music law as a sort of an outgrowth of my love for music. But this is a lot more just tied to music. So I'm very excited. Thank you for asking about it. How about you and your project?
Yeah, my project is more in the legal space. 2 episodes ago, we spoke about how I did this kind of multiple choice quiz in a book I was reading, and discovered that I'm a quote unquote guide. And what that means is I like to kind of coach or advise people who are out there doing creative things, or people who are out there, as business leaders. That's just kind of like my personality type. And really, I'm as I develop this thing and it gets closer to launch, I'm really realizing that is what has driven me to do it. So, it's just something, my practice will remain the same, but it's something that will be part of my practice. It'll be one of the buckets that I work within. And I've enjoyed the process of creating. I think that this season has helped me, do so. I hope this episode will too, because I'm not done. It's not launched yet. And I am looking forward to talking about the great advice that other folks received when they're going out on their own, because this is a bit of an independent project for me. So stay tuned, I guess, as well. We're being very, I think we're being very professional broadcastery right now, or very much like,
stay tuned.
You'll have to keep listening to hear this surprise.
Tune in next time when we drop another hint about our
next
upcoming
time
project.
On the Lawyer Life Pod.
Yeah, I do. I agree with you, though. Prepping for this episode, even, I have used a lot of this advice, even in doing this project. So I think we used a lot of it even in launching the Lawyer Life Pod. which at the beginning was a bit of an unknown, particularly for me. But when you're starting something new, all the advice from the good people who want to see you succeed is welcome. And then, as I've said on previous episodes, it's just part of it to wade through the advice from people who take pleasure in sort of pointing out all the things you might not have considered that are bad ideas. So anyway, that's where we'll go today with this.
It's funny that you mentioned the beginning of this podcast, because really it was a bit, I mean, for me, it felt more natural probably than it should have. I mean, we barely knew each other. We had just started a formalized working relationship with one another. And neither one of us had, I mean, I have experience in media and television, but neither one of us had done anything in the podcast, audio world before. And we just started it and put it out into the world like these two idealistic teenagers almost.
Yeah, and our first episodes were not our best. They get better. For true listeners, you'll recall the first episodes, but we've gotten better. And I think that's a real testament to you just start at a certain point. I guess for me, it wasn't comfortable, as you very well know, but I knew it needed to be done. And I knew that it was something that was going to align really well with a bunch of goals that I had that needed a place to be. And for me, podcasting felt like the right thing. And this project of the podcast has been so helpful in all of the reasons, I think for all the reasons we said that it would be: counseling creators, understanding what they go through, having been in the position of releasing your creative product and thinking, ooh, yikes. That's very valuable to have experienced as a lawyer. So there's that. And then on top of that, I think that it has been a really worthwhile endeavor. And not to say, I mean, we're still doing it and it continues to grow and evolve, but I'm always really happy to hear about new listeners and hear from people that we've impacted them in some way or impacted the larger conversation going on around law. So all that is great, but none of that was foreseeable when we started, right?
No, and as it so happens, I'm in this kind of fallen into with one of my clients, this kind of a podcast listening club, and she asked everybody to submit their favorite podcast episodes. And one of them that was submitted in this group was the first episode of Startup, the Gimlet podcast where Alex Bloomberg basically chronicled his beginning of what became a quite successful podcast network. And I listened to it this morning, actually. And in that episode, he talks about how, he's going to, an investor to try to get somebody to start the business. And he's told that one of the most important things is just knowing that there's an opportunity or something that can work and knowing that you're the person that can do it. And I think, so that kind of, made me think about what I'm up to and also about this episode. And I think that's a great piece of advice that if there's just something gnawing at you that you feel like, I just have to try this. It might be a great indicator that, you might be ready and you might be the one to try the thing and you might be the one perfectly suited to do it. So moving from that podcast advice to the advice we're going to discuss today, did you ever get great advice yourself when you went out and started Inter Alia?
I mean, yes, I had a lot of people who, I mean, in fairness, and I've said this before, but I didn't ask for a lot of advice because Inter Alia sort of organically became what it is. When I first started my firm, I was really going on my own instinct that what I wanted to build was not going to be what had been built before. It wasn't going to look like the traditional law firm structure. And as part of that, I was a little worried about sharing some of my thoughts with people because I did get some blowback where I was sort of, I would say, I'm starting a law firm. And they would say, oh, well, where will your office be? And I'm like, well, there won't be an office. And, oh, well, what do you mean you need an office? Oh, and then, I look back on it now and it's like, well, why? To send emails and be on the phone from? Because that is my practice. That's what I do. And I knew that about my own practice. And I think it's relevant to know yourself, know what you want to build, and understand that when people are giving you advice, they don't have your full vision, right? So the great advice that I did get and that I've gotten from, throughout the process in the last 8 years, one lawyer that I really respect in both style and approach, he said that you never do wrong by doing right. And to me, that's been the guiding factor. So whenever I'm hitting sort of a decision point, I think, well, what's the right move, big picture? And that's always the way that I will go if I can figure that out. And then the other thing is, from my own advice to myself, I guess, I just didn't want to do things because. And I heard someone say once, and I can't properly attribute the quote because I don't know where it comes from, but someone said the 8 most expensive words in business are because that's the way we've always done it. And I don't know if those are the most expensive words in business, but I do know that that's not a reason. Like, just when you hear that quote on its face, you're like, well, that is something that gets said a lot, but it's not a reason to do it that way. So I question everything, as you know, and I just tried to keep the stuff that made sense to me and ditch the rest. But, it's I take what most people say and consider it, and then I try to run it through my own filter and accept it or not. But how about you?
Well, not to inflate your ego, even more inflated than it already is, because
oh God, gracious. Yes. I barely fit in here in this basement podcasting studio.
Exactly. But when we started working together, I was kind of intimidated about the idea of quote unquote business development. I don't love the cocktail networking thing. And I hadn't done it really at all before. And so there was one thing actually that you said to me in the early days was, doing good work is business development. And that really resonated with me. And it made me actually, value the effort that I was putting into every single document or any piece of advice I was providing to clients, because it kind of felt like, it might have been when I was just starting out, I practice out on my own under the Inter Alia umbrella. I was just kind of forming a snowball, but every time I sent something that I really liked, I felt like I was kind of, making it into a bigger snowball, and it would have that effect. And that's proven true in some instances, we know for sure. So that's been good. And I think it's a great piece of advice. Just, every single time you do good work, some great business development opportunities can flow from that. So that's one. The other one, this is something I just kind of consider in life, but I think it's useful for the practice and brought me probably to this podcast, among other things, is I know that President Obama has a quote about this. I'm sure many other people have a similar quote, but you can't take yourself too seriously, but you have to take the job seriously. And I think that is, it's just kind of the way that I process a lot of things, is that I care a lot about the work I do and the clients I work for, but I don't let that become me. And I also can appreciate, feedback and know that I need to improve and know that I'm not perfect, and also be able to crack a joke and have a good time every once in a while. So those are two main things I think that were really helpful for me when I moved from a traditional lawyer role to, a more independent sort of practice.
Well, and I think that the funny thing about a number of lawyers are really funny. I mean, searingly funny. The firm that I started my summer and my beginning of my practice, I mean, jokes were really, truly hilarious. And I think that there is a reticence to show how funny we are in public or with our clients. But I always find that if you can get people laughing and enjoying the deal or enjoying the work that you're doing, it's a very relevant skill. I mean, that's the call. You can get things done faster because it's more enjoyable for everybody. There's so much value to bringing in that not taking ourselves seriously. I think where it can be problematic is exactly what you said, is if you confuse it for not doing the job seriously, then that's the issue, right? Yep. That's the line. But yeah, I love that. I love that quote.
Yeah.
Should we talk about what our other law firm founder friends told us?
I think we should do so.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about starting your own firm is that while you're not part of a traditional firm anymore, so say you're practicing today at a big firm or a firm where there are many lawyers, that's currently kind of your network, that and the opposing counsel. And what I found when I went out on my own was there are all these solo and small firms out there, and it makes really great sense to befriend them and get to know them and start to network together and help each other out. And I've taken an extraordinary amount of guidance from other people that are doing the same thing. So from the group that I sort of consult from time to time, I threw open the question of, hey, who's got some great advice that you'd want to share with people launching their own firms? So I'll start with the advice I got from Megan Keenberg of Van Crawling and Keenberg. It is a commercial litigation and IP boutique here in Toronto. And she had a bunch of great advice. So maybe some of it I can share in subsequent podcasts too, but I'll take the 2 points that I really related to. And she said, think about what worked well in your previous organization, whatever it was, and what didn't work well, and strive to improve on the stuff you can and don't bring over the things that didn't work. And very simple, but there are just things that don't work and that people do over and over and over again and just duplicate again just because. And I think for me, getting rid of those things has been helpful, and then focusing in on the things that made sense and improving on them. That's the thing. So it was interesting to see that from another founder. She also said, very important point, and the Lawyer Life pod would not exist if we had not done this, but don't get mired in perfection. Be focused on forward movement and lower your perfectionist standards to a solid B+ to get the firm launched. Amen.
Yeah.
Not because you want to be B+, but because you don't know. You don't know what the standard is. You don't know what's going to work yet. So if you don't start and if you don't just get moving, how will you know? There's no way. So as you settle in, you get a better and better understanding of what's going to work, what's not going to work, and you make incremental change and you go from there. So I thought that was really good advice from her.
Yeah, it can be intimidating when you are, putting something out there. But the thing to realize is it's not made in stone, right? Like the very nature of making a thing on your own is that it just has to evolve to be successful. I've heard like the second that you have an effective strategy is the second that you need to start evolving that effective strategy, right? If not, it'll stagnate, your competition will copy it or find a better way to do it. And then all of a sudden, it's not an effective strategy anymore. That applies in business, it applies in sports, it applies in so many ways. So that seems to make a great deal of sense to me. Make the best thing that you can within the time constraints, other constraints you have. Don't let perfection hold you back. Launch something you're confident in, but you know that it doesn't have to be perfect because it will continue to evolve.
And you'll learn things that will make it better. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Why don't I go next? I reached out to a friend of mine, a great lawyer, Rich Appia, who I guess like a few years ago now, seems like yesterday, went out on his own, made it and started Appia Law. That's APPIAH Law. And they're an employment law firm in Toronto. He said, when he was thinking about going on his own, one question kept running through his mind: what if I fail? And his partner turned to him one day and said, but what if you succeed, Rich? Why is the default, he says, Rich, why is the default to look at failure, not success? That changed my perspective on decision-making completely. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think this, like, especially, I mean, lawyers often, through training and maybe for other personality-driven reasons, we look at the risk and we look at the negatives and the drawbacks. But I think the useful thing for many of us in the profession is to look at, like, what's your record? Like personally, like, show me a time where you weren't, so to speak, succeeding at what you did. And why don't we just kind of like look at that record as, maybe a better indication of where we might wind up in the future, as opposed to like a nightmare scenario that we dream up in our heads.
Mm-hmm. Well, and similarly, we're so used to flagging risks. We're just so attuned to that. But there was a guy that I used to work with who would always walk by like the office philosopher, and he would say, what would you do today if you weren't afraid? And I'm like, great way to look at things, like you notice once you hear that quote, oh, I probably am afraid of failure. I probably am afraid that people will think this is a dumb idea, but like, that's okay. That's just a fear, They might not, or they might think it's a great idea. So you don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think also driving from that point, it's like whether or not you're nervous or whether or not you don't have a book of business right now, you have a great opportunity. I mean, other folks who have just as much drive and ideas and aspirations don't have this opportunity that it sits before you. And so, definitely, I agree with you. It's a perspective of being grateful and seeing what's in front of you.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean, you know my thoughts on this, but valuing what you have is the start to getting more of that, I think.
Yeah.
Let me talk about what Lisa said from Spring Law. Lisa Stam is a fellow founder of a virtual law firm that does employment law also. And she said, which I thought I very much related to, and I'm glad that I took action on this point earlier this year, or Mike would definitely have had something to say about it. She says the key skill is to know when to fire yourself as an entrepreneur from jobs. So when you are a solo and you start something, you do all the jobs at first. And she says, value the time that you spend on the business and don't think that it's easy, no value admin work. It's not. It's CEO work that should be properly valued. So fire yourself from being the firm's temp. And there are probably lawyers listening to this right now that could act on that immediately. And it's never been more possible than in this environment where the standard of working with people, you can get virtual assistants, you can get a piece of technology that can automate something. Like, we don't really have an excuse for doing work that isn't the best. We're not the best person to be doing it. So I did this year. I'm steadily moving towards doing a better job of it. And it is life-changing in a lot of ways. So I fully agree with that. And I think that probably could have done it sooner, but, focus on the positive.
Yeah, I could see how this would come to be, only because I'm on the other end of things with the little thing I'm starting up. Like, I am passionate about every word I'm writing to describe, the business or, the logo look and feel. You really get into the weeds as you create something. Because you need to. And as we talked about in the first episode, a lot of this is about you and your strengths and your passions and your interests. And so it makes sense to be in the weeds that way. But then, Darlene, you're on the other end of it, where like the thing has grown to a point where that just is, that doesn't make sense any longer, right? And that the processes are baked and that, there's enough there that you can say, okay, I've figured these parts out. Here, capable person, right?
Right.
You can now do these things as I focus on whatever, the next stage, the next strategy, the next person, whatever it is.
You raise a very important point. Actually, here, capable person. So I think a lot of lawyers struggle with exactly that. So if there was why didn't I do it earlier? Partly because I didn't have the person that I knew I could seamlessly do it with. That was the issue. And I think that that is a weakness a little bit. I think you could get to that point earlier than I did. But it is really important to build something that you can, when you find the right person. And in my case, I was lucky enough to get to work with someone that I worked with for 8 years in my old job. And she's Roanne Aline. She's our paralegal at Inter Alia Law. She's amazing. And thanks to her, she has been able to, she knows me, so she can take it off my hands in a way that I know will work for me. And I think that could just be a really great hire. It could be setting up a great system in the first place. But in this case, it's been a bit of a bunch of things, but you got to do what you need to do as an entrepreneur, I guess, to be able to hand it off completely. Because if you stay one foot in it, it is the worst of all worlds.
Even if, I'm thinking about myself just starting or folks that are, in early stages still, at least consider that the day will come, right? And prepare for that. So
Correct.
when you're making something, think about, can this just be a process instead of me doing it in my mind every time? Or, you can start to mention people, hey, you know what? In 6 months, I think I might want to bring on some help and start to float that out there. So instead of just like the day that feels like the world's crashing down around you and you finally put up your hands and say, I need somebody, you're not starting from scratch. And you have actually probably built some referrals and some networks and so on, that you do have candidates or potential candidates or folks that have, expressed interest that you can start to draw from. So it's something that we can, well, we all might not be there, especially folks just starting out, pursuant to perhaps this season. At least it's something that we can keep in the back of our minds, and consider the day where we hand over our baby or a part of this new venture to that capital C capable individual.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're right. A lot of that is just upkeep. Like, it was relatively easy to transition that all over because it was taking something that I knew inside out and had built. And then I could say, okay, now here's what you do. And I think sometimes systems get into a state where it's impossible to bring someone on. And then you need expensive technology and, like a bunch of different things. So yeah, that could be personal, but.
Yeah. And anything built around an individual and that like solely around that individual, not around the process, is problematic for a number of reasons. Even something as like practical and economic as if you build something and want to make an exit, is it about you or is it about what you've built? Right. Or if you happen to fall ill, can your thing still run because you've built processes and have people that can support it? Like we do talk about why it's important to make something that's unique to you. But I suppose that, the opposite truth too, is that it can't be only about you and what you're doing in your head. In that way, I mean, there's problems there.
Yeah, you have to be able to unplug from it too, because if you make it without the systems, without a capable person to help you, you can't unplug ever. You can't take a vacation if you build it wrong.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so you also wanted to bring some tips from the book Tiger Tactics, Powerful Strategies for Winning Law Firms, which we'll link to in the show notes, and mostly from William, otherwise known as Bill, Umansky.
Yeah, I read this book. I have a few law firm books. There's a book by the people from the Lawyerist called Small Firm Roadmap, which is helpful. There's this book, Tiger Tactics. And the chapter that I liked from this really summarizes what each of the authors, there are 5 authors, I believe, and what each of them really got as advice in their careers. And some of the things that I related to, it was very different. So depending on each person, they each kind of threw in a bunch of advice. So if you're interested in getting another additional source to what we've been talking about, check that book out. And Billie Umansky has some good stuff, really focused on the bringing the whole person to work stuff that everyone who listens to Lawyer Life podcast will know that you and I espouse. And really talking about remembering it's about loving what you do. Build something that you are going to enjoy. You get to build it, so make sure you enjoy it. Because as I said, there will come this point where you're busy and it's difficult and you need to love it to stick in it. That's just a basic thing about entrepreneurship. So if you build something that you can surround yourself with great people, if you want to enjoy your day, if you love the type of law that you're doing, the type of clients you're attracting, that's how it works. And some of his tips really go to that, and I related to them. And he also says, and I think it really should be said, if you don't love law, do something else. We have a very flexible degree, and if there's something else that you enjoy doing, maybe transition or have law as part of your life and work on something else. But we have an extraordinary degree with a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I think
that related
on that point, for folks at all stages in their career, I think that it's often a feeling that you're trapped in this profession, in the job that you currently have. It feels like anything outside of it is an impossibility, and you just have to kind of keep going because there's no other alternative. And for some folks, that could be true. I mean, it could be there's a huge amount of student debt that you have, and there's no other way you could possibly continue. And maybe there's a period of time where you need to keep this job, or there's other life circumstances where you just don't have the privilege to start to consider something new. But for other folks, it might just be more of a cultural fiction, an ego-driven piece, or other, something else that isn't necessarily as strong of a barrier as you think it might be. And so it might be worth sitting down and evaluating these things if you feel trapped and if you feel that there's no alternative. Maybe consider if that's structurally true or if it's just a narrative. And if it doesn't seem like there's these structures, true, foundational things keeping you in that role, perhaps consider, I have a degree that mostly and a career path that shows that I am a capital C capable person. Like that is effectively the lawyer calling card. And so maybe I can use that to go elsewhere, apply my expertise, apply my business savvy, apply my attention to detail, my reliability, all these sort of traits in a different sort of way.
Right. Honestly, it's like we've been hanging out together talking about
Virtually.
Ego.
Literally.
I can't remember which are my ideas and which are yours. We've merged so seamlessly into this, into the shared
Well,
view.
we can finally reveal to folks that I actually am just a AI version of Darlene that she's been programming over the past 2.5 years.
Well, the machine learning is complete if at the end of
exactly.
the day we're always talking ego.
Oh, now I'm ready to replace
man.
you, Darlene. With
Oh
my
no,
evil AI.
back the capable person. Oh my God. Anyway, I jest, but as you were talking, I was remembering back to two things that I've observed. A lot of law students and people early in their careers reach out to me from time to time, or I run into them, as Mike and I have spoken at law schools. I do it sometimes on my own. And I see these incredibly competent people. And I look at all of them and I think, I am quite certain I was not that polished when I went through law school. I would put money on that. And I just think that the world is there. There's so much potential, but it doesn't feel that way at that moment. It feels like there's the job to get, the thing. If you don't get it, all is lost. And I just think, to echo what you're saying, it's not true. And one funny thing, one story that I hope will be helpful. I did meet a student once who was leaving articling and had been articling in the insurance industry and was going on to try to find a job as a first year. And she said to me, well, I'm an insurance lawyer. Like, that's where all my experience is. And so I need to look in insurance. And I said, okay, well, do you like insurance? No, I hate it. Okay. Well, you're not yet an insurance lawyer. You've got a year of training in one area of law. Now you can focus on what that equips you to do later. So that's the other thing I would say. If you're in a job now or you're in a firm and you practice a type of law and you really don't like it, I don't know if it will be something that you like when you're on your own, Mm-hmm. So consider what the options are too, when you're transitioning from something that you already do and thinking it would be better if you were doing that same thing on your own. Like, really examine whether that's the case, I think, to your point.
Yeah.
That's it. That's about all that I will say from the book, but there is more in there and more than we have time to get into in this episode, for sure.
Okay. Well, so that, effectively is the end of our short run 3-episode season, but the substance of going out on your own and doing something innovative. We obviously will come back with our goods and gripes. But before we do that, thank you everybody for giving us a listen in this short season. We hope what we've delivered, while brief, can be really useful to you in whatever stage you are in your life or stage of your career. Always, I guess my goal with making this thing with Darlene is to at least, hopefully you all can get one little piece of gold from every episode that you can apply to your life in some way. I think that, this season might have some of those little pieces of gold. What Kimberly Bennett provided was amazing. This advice that we've harvested from other experienced folks, I know I'm drawing a lot of inspiration from. So just in general, I hope this has been useful for folks. I know it's been useful for me. And stay tuned on my new thing that I've been creating as we've been recording this.
Okay. Sounds good.
You don't want to do a nice, kitschy, lovey-dovey sign-off?
Okay, yes, I do. Thank you for the prompt. Well, I agree. I think that always, as with the Lawyer Life podcast, the things that come along as we think up ideas for our episodes, we're always focused on what's going to help other people, and we always get something out of it that's going to be helpful to us too. So we continue to create, we continue to try to make things that are helpful to the profession and, surface for our listeners the awesome people and the great advice that we are so lucky to get to come across. So yeah, thanks, Mike, for reminding me to do a little bit of a gratitude wrap up.
I have been programmed to ensure gratitude is provided on podcast. Goodness. Okay.
Your training has been unorthodox.
Yes.
At Inter Alia.
Yeah. Okay. We will take a break and we'll come back with our goods and gripes. The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law. Inter Alia lawyers have big firm training, in-house experience, and a wide range of expertise in technology, media, and entertainment. Our advice is business-focused, speedy, and practical. To learn more, visit interalialaw.com. That's interaliaa-law.com. And we are back with our goods and gripes. Goods are things we want to promote and support, and gripes are things that annoy us. Darlene, would you like to start?
Okay, I'll start with a gripe. It's so small, but I just wanted to say I go for a walk around my neighborhood, and there's a big hill, and my boots are getting, like, the grips are not working anymore. And the other day I was sliding down the hill, really sort of like a cartoon character, like arms are out and I'm like clearly about to bail. And someone walking up the hill with like superior boots and a dog was like, "Hey, pretty slippery, be careful." And I'm like, okay, a little bit of a gripe. Like when someone's about to bail, I might be like, "Can I give you a hand? Looks like you're going to fall," as opposed to, "Hey, pretty slippery, like be careful." Like, thanks for that. I don't know what to do with that information.
I alerted you to the slippiness by slipping.
By looking the way that I do, like a total lunatic going down this hill. And I thought to myself, helpful advice if they've just gone down the slippery hill and I'm about to like come down it from the top or something. It was just like the weirdest interaction. Anyway, slight gripe. Okay. How about you? Do you have any smaller or larger gripes?
I have a goody gripe. So I'll start with the good, which will easily transition me to the gripe, which is exactly the same thing pretty much. So lately, this is mostly about like, I guess, buying stuff that solves problems. But like in general, I've always kind of been the type to like maybe overthink stuff a little bit. And then like, if I see something I need to do or a problem I need to fix, especially if it's more significant, I kind of think about it a lot and I get tortured by it. And then eventually eventually it gets fixed and I feel very happy. But lately I've just been like, I'm just going to try to do this right now. I'm just going to try to fix it. That feels good. And I like that. That's my good, is just not overthinking. And if it's a fairly minimal thing, just like solve the problem and move. I like that. But also now, and it's also in me, I just love solving problems so much that now I see them everywhere. And now I like get distracted by the thing I want to fix when I have other stuff I want to do. And so I still do the stuff I need to, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh man, that, the basement, blah, 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 still needs to be this and that. So I do obviously have to work on like letting that go, making this like a reasonable kind of amount of problem fixiness. And promptness. But anyway, that's where I'm at right now. I love fixing problems in this time. Like things are organized in the house. I love doing it. It's like where I'm pouring a lot of my extra time into, but maybe I'm going a bit overboard. Is that kind of where I'm at?
Interesting. Well, you certainly applied that skill to me with the mic, because let's face it.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
Hey, listener, listen to this. So Darlene's former microphone, thank goodness, was on the fritz for I don't know how long, like months. And so we have meetings booked to record this podcast. And the last two have been me trying to get virtually, obviously, like over the phone, a combination of the phone and the internet, two conversations, like one conversation, two mediums, trying to coach Darlene to fix this microphone. Oh my gosh.
Maximally annoying.
Oh, it was just the worst. And then because this is all in context of like, we have an hour to record this thing or whatever, this and that. And finally, and then Darlene orders her new microphone, and then she says to me, but I'll probably keep the other one just in case. It was like, keep it for what? It's terrible. Get rid of it
I think
as soon
the
as you
high
can.
point, the high point of the conversation was when I was like, no, I think that maybe, like, I have some hope that it might work in the future. And you're like, there's no hope. There's no hope. Darlene.
What
And I
more
was like,
evidence do
okay.
you need that this is a problematic piece of equipment?
Yeah, I need to go to Best Buy in the height of a pandemic and get a new microphone because, oh man.
That is one thing about
Anyway,
our relationship, which I honestly do value, is I definitely feel comfortable being direct with you at this point. And I know I was doing that on that call. I was being very
well,
direct.
it was very direct.
Yeah.
And you know what? We have to be like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
You have to, when you have a creative relationship, you're making some things, then if there's an obstacle and one person's not acting on it, you know, that's the terms of business, I think. So I'm fine with it. And I sent you puns to make up for it.
Yeah.
So it was all fine, I hope.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
thank you for this. A few good laughs as always.
She says defeated. Okay. That's all. Thanks everybody for listening. And we'll be back soon with a fresh new season. Until then, we'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.